Hey everybody, this is Mr. Mazzaro again, and today we're going to continue our talks about how plants develop and diversify by talking about what photosynthesis is. We're going to start by talking about why plants photosynthesize in the first place. It's this thing that most plants do, so why do they do it? What's the point of doing it? And then we're going to talk about how they actually absorb the light they use for photosynthesis. I mean, we know that photosynthesis needs light, but how are plants taking in that light? And then we're going to talk about the different parts of photosynthesis. It is one word, but it's actually talking about a series of different chemical reactions. And there are different parts, and each of those chemical reactions are doing different things for the plant. And we're going to go further into what each of those parts are and what happens during each phase. So let's get started. So photosynthesis at its very basic is just a plant using light, carbon dioxide, and water to make its food. Photosynthesis at its very simplest part is just a plant using light to make food. The reason you never see a plant eating anything is because it's actually using light, photosynthesis, carbon dioxide absorbed from the air and water absorbed from its roots to make the food that it needs to live and survive. Now again, photosynthesis needs three things. Sunlight is one of them, and then it needs carbon dioxide from the air and water from the ground. When all three of those things are there, the plant can convert that carbon dioxide and water, when it's day and light outside, into sugar and oxygen. The sugar is called glucose, C6H12O6. Oxygen is what plants give off. So photosynthesis absorbs carbon dioxide and water and gives off glucose and oxygen. And if you have your notes out in front of you, write that down. I know that absorbs and gives off isn't down in the red letters, but I actually want you to understand that photosynthesis absorbs carbon dioxide and water to give off glucose and oxygen. Okay, well, what about that light? How are plants absorbing light? I mean, I understand they're getting CO2 because CO2 is in the air. I understand they're getting water because water's in the ground. But how are they getting light? Well, they're absorbing light via pigments, which are just molecules that absorb certain colors of light. They're just colored molecules. And the main pigment inside plants are chlorophyll. That's the main photosynthetic pigment. It's actually what makes plants green, chlorophyll. Now, if you look at this picture, this is a picture of how well chlorophyll absorbs different colors of light. And what you'll notice is that chlorophyll absorbs certain colors of light a lot better than other colors of light. It absorbs blue light and red light the best. But it absorbs green light the worst. And I know that's kind of hard to figure out. I mean, you think about it like plants are green, you'd think that green light would be good for them. But again, plants are green because they're reflecting, they're giving off green light. They're rejecting it. They don't want any of it. That's why we see them as green. You hardly ever see a blue or red leaf, and that's because plants' chlorophyll are absorbing those blue lights and red lights and not letting them to our eye. This is also the reason why if you look at a lot of grow lights, if you actually look at LED lights that are used for growing plants, that a lot of those LEDs are blue and red, and mixtures are blue and red light. And they're not usually white light, and the reason is because white light has lots of green and yellow and orange light in it, and as you see by this picture, none of those lights are particularly that useful for photosynthesis, so it's just wasted electricity. Pigments allow plants to absorb light, and specifically the main photosynthetic pigment, chlorophyll, absorbs blue light and red light the best, and green light the worst. Now, I understand photosynthesis, and I understand that they're absorbing light, but what about that CO2 and water going in? What are they using that for? Well, this goes into the different parts of photosynthesis. Different parts of photosynthesis use water and CO2 and get different things out of those molecules. And photosynthesis, for the purposes of our discussion, really has two parts. The first part is called the light reaction. This is where plants use light energy to break apart water into hydrogen and oxygen. They literally take light and they use that light to separate the hydrogen and oxygen from water. So, what does the light reaction absorb? The light reaction takes in light and water. And it releases oxygen and hydrogen. But why do I only say oxygen here? Well, because that hydrogen gets passed along into our next reaction. So, light reaction, first reaction in photosynthesis. Think of it like a solar panel sucking in light energy and converting it into something that can actually break apart water into oxygen and hydrogen. The oxygen is given off. What about the hydrogen? Well, the hydrogen goes into the second part of photosynthesis, the dark reaction. The dark reaction takes the hydrogen from the light reaction and sticks it to carbon dioxide to make glucose or plant food. So, unlike the light reaction was the dark reaction absorbed, the dark reaction is sucking in carbon dioxide from the air. And then it's using the hydrogen from the from the light reaction, sticking it to the carbon and oxygen, and producing a molecule that has carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. In this case, glucose, plant food, sugar. Most plants photosynthesize. Remember, that's not one of the 4 characteristics that all plants shares. But when they photosynthesize, they're doing that to make food. How do plants not photosynthesize? Don't all plants need to eat? Well, yeah, but some plants are parasites. They can suck the life or sugar or food out of other organisms. A famous example of this would be the Titan aurum. It's the largest flower in the world. It's 9 feet tall, 3 feet wide, about 100 pounds, but it's nothing but a flower. There are no leaves for photosynthesis. There are no roots for absorbing water. Instead, that flower just sucks in all the life around it, literally sends shoots into the roots of other plants, sucking out the glucose made from their photosynthesis and using that food to generate that huge flower. So again, photosynthesis, 2 reactions, light reaction, dark reaction. Light reaction uses light to separate water into oxygen and hydrogen. The oxygen goes away. The hydrogen goes into the dark reaction, gets stuck to CO2 to make sugar, which plants eat. If you look at the reaction for photosynthesis again, and this is really the same reaction that I showed you in that beginning, CO2 and water going in, glucose and oxygen going out, now you can actually see that photosynthesis isn't one big reaction where this is all happening at once. In fact, it's 2 reactions. The first reaction is the light reaction. Water going in and light energy separating it into oxygen and hydrogen. The oxygen goes away, so why isn't the hydrogen here? Well, that's because it's getting stuck to the CO2 in the dark reaction to make that CO2 into CHO, glucose. This one big reaction that we call photosynthesis is actually 2 of these smaller reactions combined. So that's it. I know you've gotten days and weeks of photosynthesis in other biology classes, and I know that it may seem weird that in a botany class, especially a class about plants, that we wouldn't spend more time on photosynthesis. But the reality is that's really what you need to know from the horticulture side of photosynthesis. If you want to grow plants, that's your very basic idea of what you need to know. I know that a lot of people you can get a lot more complicated, and you can talk about ATP and NADPH and electron holes and all this stuff, but the reality is none of that stuff is going to help you grow a flower. What I just told you hopefully is going to help you grow a flower, right? So if you want to grow a flower, right, why does that flower need to photosynthesize? Because the flower needs to eat, right? And that flower is going to absorb light in its green parts, its photosynthetic parts. That green is pigments, chlorophyll, that absorbs blue and red light the best and rejects the green light. That's why the green leaves appear green. And what is it doing with that light? Well, it's using that light in the light reaction to take water and break it apart. The oxygen goes into the air. Thank you, plants. That's what we breathe. But the hydrogen stays and gets stuck to carbon dioxide that plants absorb from the air through their leaves to make into sugar that the plant eats. Light reaction and dark reaction. Light reaction breaks apart water into hydrogen and oxygen. Dark reaction takes that hydrogen, sticks it to glucose to make sugar. That's all for photosynthesis, guys. And our next chapter will talk a little bit more about the different parts of plants and what they're all doing.